The harsh spring sun glinted off the revolver's handle as Isabelle Montgomery watched from the shade of the saloon's porch, her heart racing with a mix of fear and fascination. The stranger hadn't moved a muscle, even with three of Williston's meanest boys surrounding him, their laughter cutting through the dusty Wyoming air of 1885. She'd never seen anyone stand so still in the face of certain violence, as if the cowboy had somehow turned to stone while still breathing. "You best run along now, mister," hollered Earl, the largest of the three local troublemakers. "This here's a respectable town, and we don't take kindly to your sort." The stranger, tall and lean with curious eyes that seemed both ancient and youthful, simply adjusted his worn hat. Even from a distance, Isabelle could see he wasn't like other drifters who passed through Williston. Something in the way he carried himself spoke of quiet dignity rather than the usual desperation. "My sort," the stranger's voice was surprisingly gentle. "And what sort might that be?" The question hung in the air as Isabelle found herself moving closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. Her father would have scolded her for getting involved in men's business, especially since she'd worked so hard to establish herself as the town's only female shopkeeper. At 24, she'd finally gained a measure of respect in Williston, and her mercantile was finally turning a profit, but something about this confrontation pulled at her. "The misfit sort," Earl spat on the ground. "Look at them boots patched 3 times over. And that coat ain't fit for a scarecrow." The stranger glanced down at his attire and a small smile touched his lips. "These boots have carried me across 5 territories. I reckon they've earned their patches." His calm response only seemed to irritate the men further. One of them, a wiry fellow named Tucker, stepped forward with his hand hovering near his pistol. "We don't need no philosophical tramps in Williston. Best move along before you get moved." Isabelle had seen this pattern before. It usually ended with a beating or worse, and the stranger looked like he'd endured enough hardship without adding more. Before she could think better of it, she stepped forward. "Gentlemen," she called out, her voice steadier than her racing pulse, "I believe I have business with this man." All 4 men turned to look at her. The locals with surprise, Isabelle Montgomery rarely involved herself in street confrontations, and the stranger with a curious tilt of his head. "Miss Montgomery," Earl tipped his hat, instantly shifting his demeanor. Her father might be gone, but his memory still commanded respect. "Didn't see you there. You know this fella. He's here about the job," she improvised, nodding toward her mercantile across the street. "I sent word to Casper last month that I needed help with the spring inventory." The lie fell from her lips with surprising ease, and she met the stranger's gaze, silently pleading with him to play along. After a beat that felt like eternity, he nodded. "That's right, madam," he said, his voice revealing nothing. "Isaac Miller at your service." Earl and his companions exchanged doubtful glances but stepped back. Nobody wanted to upset Isabelle Montgomery, whose store supplied half the county with essentials. "Well then," Earl muttered, "best get to your counting, Miller, but we'll be keeping an eye on you." The 3 men sauntered away, throwing occasional glances over their shoulders. Isabelle released the breath she'd been holding and turned to the stranger Isaac Miller, apparently. "Thank you for that," Isaac said quietly, "though I suspect you've just complicated things for yourself." Isabelle studied him more closely now. His face was weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes held an intelligence that caught her off guard. He wasn't handsome in the conventional sense, but there was something compelling about him. "It's nothing," she replied. "Those 3 cause trouble for sport." You'd have been another notch on Earl's belt by sundown. Even so, Isaac removed his hat, revealing dark hair with premature streaks of silver at the temples. "I don't make a habit of being rescued by strangers." "Isabelle Montgomery," she offered her hand, "and now we're not strangers." He hesitated before taking her hand, his touch brief but surprisingly gentle for a man who looked like he'd worked with his hands his whole life. "Isaac Miller, though I suspect you gathered that. Is that your real name, or something you improvised on the spot?" A smile crossed his face, transforming it entirely. "It's mine, one of the few things I still own outright." An awkward silence fell between them, and Isabelle suddenly realized the predicament she'd created. "About the job, don't worry," Isaac placed his hat back on his head. I'll be moving on, no need to maintain the charade. Actually, Isabelle found herself saying, I could use the help. Isaac's eyebrows rose in surprise. Miss Montgomery, you don't know the first thing about me. I know you didn't draw on those men despite provocation, which suggests you're either very smart or very foolish. I'm hoping it's the former. She smoothed her skirts, a nervous habit. Besides, my usual stock boy left for the railroad last month, and the spring shipments arrive next week. Isaac studied her for a long moment, as if trying to decipher some hidden message in her words. People will talk. People always talk in Williston. It's practically the town pastime. Isabelle gestured toward her store. The job includes room and board. There's a small apartment above the storeroom. The pay isn't much, but it's honest work. Why would you offer employment to a man you just met? A man those fellows clearly thought was trouble? Isabelle considered her answer carefully. The truth was, she wasn't entirely sure herself. Let's just say I recognize someone who needs a fair chance when I see one. God knows I needed one myself after my father died. Something in her words seemed to reach him, and Isaac nodded slowly. I can handle inventory, stock shelves, and manage heavy lifting. I'm also decent with figures if you need help with the books. A cowboy who can cipher. Now that is unexpected. I've been many things besides a cowboy, Miss Montgomery. There was no boast in his voice, just simple fact. And I suspect you've been more than just a shopkeeper. Isabelle felt a flush creep up her neck. Few people in town looked beyond her practical dresses and business-like manner to see anything else. The job is yours if you want it, Mr. Miller. We can discuss the details inside. As she led him toward the mercantile, Isabelle felt the weight of curious stares from passers-by. Williston had barely accepted a woman running her father's business. Bringing in this mysterious stranger would certainly set tongues wagging. But there was something about Isaac Miller that compelled her to take the risk. Neither of them could have guessed how that simple decision would change both their lives forever. The first week of Isaac's employment passed in a blur of activity. The spring shipments arrived as predicted, and Isabelle found herself impressed by his efficiency and strength. He unloaded crates that would have taken 2 men to manage, organized the storeroom better than it had been in years, and maintained a courteous but professional distance from her. That distance both relieved and disappointed her, though she couldn't quite explain why. On Friday afternoon, as golden sunlight slanted through the store's front windows, Isabelle was going over the ledger when the bell above the door chimed. Florence Fletcher stepped inside, her eyes widening when she spotted Isaac restocking the shelves of canned goods. Isabelle, Florence greeted, her voice carrying that particular tone that meant gossip was imminent. I thought Martha was exaggerating when she said you'd hired that drifter. Mr. Miller is my new assistant, Isabelle replied evenly, though she noticed Isaac's shoulders tense slightly, and he's proving quite capable. Florence approached the counter, lowering her voice to a stage whisper that was certainly still audible to Isaac. Do you think that's wise? A single woman employing a man of uncertain background. People are talking. People always talk, Florence. What can I help you with today? But Florence wasn't to be deterred from her mission. Reverend Phillips mentioned his concern just yesterday. Said it wasn't proper, you living above the store with him right below. Isabelle set down her pencil with deliberate calm. Mr. Miller has his own quarters in the back storeroom, completely separate from my apartment. And I don't recall Reverend Phillips expressing concern when old Mr. Jenkins worked for my father in the same arrangement. That was different. Mr. Jenkins was 70 if he was a day, and incapable of lifting anything heavier than a ledger book toward the end, Isabelle countered. Now, did you come for gossip or goods, Florence? The woman's mouth tightened, but she produced a shopping list. 4 yards of the blue gingham if you still have it, and we need more coffee. As Isabelle gathered Florence's items, she was aware of Isaac methodically continuing his work, giving no indication he heard the exchange. But later, after Florence had left and the afternoon customers had dwindled, he approached the counter. Perhaps I should find other accommodations, he said quietly. Isabelle looked up from her ledger. Because of Florence Fletcher, I wouldn't give that woman the satisfaction. It's not just her. I've seen the looks when I'm sweeping the front walk, heard the whispers. He leaned against the counter, his expression serious. "You've built something here, Miss Montgomery. I won't be the cause of its undoing. Williston survived when I took over my father's business despite predictions of imminent failure. It will survive my hiring choices as well." She closed the ledger with a decisive thump. "Unless you're uncomfortable with the arrangement, I've slept in less comfortable places than your storeroom," he replied with a hint of a smile, "and had far worse employers." "High praise indeed," she said dryly, but returned his smile. The bell chimed again, and Sheriff Daniels stepped inside, his weathered face neutral but his eyes sharp as they took in the scene. "Miss Montgomery," he nodded, then turned to Isaac. "Miller, Sheriff," they responded in unison. "Just making my rounds," Daniels said, though it was clear this was no routine visit. "Thought I'd check in, see how your new employee is working out." "Quite well, thank you," Isabelle replied, her tone pleasant but firm. Daniels nodded, then turned his attention fully to Isaac. "Where did you say you were from, Miller?" "I didn't," Isaac replied evenly, "but I came most recently from Colorado Territory. And before that, various places. I've worked ranches in Texas, Kansas, and Nebraska over the years." The sheriff walked around the store, seemingly examining the merchandise but clearly sizing up Isaac. "Funny thing, got a wire from the sheriff over in Casper, says they don't recall anyone matching your description looking for work last month." Isabelle's heart sank. Her impulsive lie was coming back to haunt them. "That would be because I wasn't in Casper last month," Isaac said calmly. "Miss Montgomery and I had a prior arrangement through correspondence." The sheriff's eyebrows rose. "Is that so?" Before Isabelle could formulate a response that wouldn't dig them deeper, Isaac continued smoothly. "My former employer, Mr. Donovan of the Circle D Ranch near Denver, provided a reference. I can give you his details if you'd like to confirm." The mention of the Circle D seemed to give Daniels pause. It was a well-known operation, respected throughout the territories. "That won't be necessary for now, just keeping an eye out for the town's welfare." He tipped his hat to Isabelle. "Good day, Miss Montgomery." After the sheriff left, Isabelle exhaled slowly. "Circle D Ranch, I did work there," Isaac said, returning to his shelf stocking. "2 seasons about 5 years back. Donovan's a fair man and we parted on good terms. You're remarkably calm about being interrogated by the sheriff." Isaac shrugged. "Not my first interrogation, probably won't be my last." "That's not particularly reassuring," Isabelle said, studying him. "Is there something in your past I should know about, Mr. Miller, something that might bring trouble to my door?" He paused, a can of peaches in his hand, and met her gaze directly. "Nothing that would endanger you or your business, Miss Montgomery. I give you my word on that." There was something in his voice, a quiet sincerity that made her believe him, despite the obvious gaps in his story. Isabelle nodded slowly. "I'll hold you to that word," she said. "And perhaps you should start calling me Isabelle since we're conspiring together now." A smile ghosted across his features. "Then I'm Isaac, though I'm not sure what we're conspiring about." "Surviving Williston's dedicated gossips, for one thing." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been on her mind since their first meeting. "Why didn't you draw on those men that day? You carry a gun. I've seen it when you think no one's looking." Isaac was quiet for so long she thought he might not answer. Finally, he said, "I've seen enough violence to last several lifetimes. I don't reach for a gun unless there's no other choice." The simple statement hung in the air between them, revealing more about Isaac Miller than anything he'd said before. Isabelle nodded, understanding that she'd been given a rare glimpse beneath his careful exterior. "Well then," she said softly, "I'm glad I intervened before choices became limited." Their eyes met across the store, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits beneath very different exteriors. Then Isaac nodded and returned to his work, leaving Isabelle with the strange sense that her impulsive decision to help him might prove to be more significant than she'd initially realized. As April gave way to May, Isaac settled into a routine at the mercantile. His presence gradually became less remarkable to the townspeople, particularly as they discovered his knack for finding exactly what they needed in the increasingly organized store. Even Florence Fletcher grudgingly admitted that he was surprisingly helpful for a drifter, after he tracked down an obscure type of button she required for her husband's shirt. One morning, as thunderclouds gathered on the horizon, promising a spring storm, Isabelle was surprised to find Isaac already in the main store when she came downstairs, repairing a loose floorboard near the entrance. "You're up early," she remarked, watching as he skillfully hammered the board back into place. "Thought I'd fix this before someone tripped," he replied, sitting back on his heels to examine his work. "Mrs. Henderson caught her shoe on it yesterday." "I didn't notice," Isabelle admitted, feeling a pang of guilt. Her father had always been meticulous about store maintenance. "You were busy with the new fabric order." Isaac stood, brushing dust from his hands. "Coffee's fresh, by the way. Figured we might need extra today with that storm coming in." The casual thoughtfulness of the gesture caught Isabelle off guard. In the weeks since Isaac had arrived, they had developed a comfortable working relationship, but moments like these small kindnesses offered without expectations still surprised her. "Thank you," she said, pouring herself a cup from the pot on the small stove in the back. "Do you think it will be a bad one, the storm?" Isaac glanced out the window at the darkening sky. "My knee says yes." "Your knee predicts weather," Isabelle asked, amused. "Old injury, aches when pressure changes." He flexed the leg in question. "More reliable than any barometer, war injury." She asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its propriety. Isaac's expression shuddered slightly. "Something like that." Before she could decide whether to press further, the bell above the door chimed and Frederick Foster, the banker's son, stepped inside, shaking water from his hat. The rain had started, fat drops spattering against the windows. "Morning, Miss Montgomery," he greeted, his smile too wide, too practiced. He nodded curtly to Isaac. "Miller, Mr. Foster," Isabelle replied professionally. "What brings you out in this weather?" "Actually," Frederick straightened his already impeccable waistcoat, "I came to extend an invitation. The Founders' Day dance is next Saturday, and I would be honored if you would accompany me." Isabelle blinked in surprise. Frederick had never shown particular interest in her before, beyond the courteous greetings expected between business associates. His father, Harold Foster, controlled the bank that held the mortgage on her store, but their interactions had always been strictly professional. "That's very kind of you," she began, caught off guard. "Father thinks it would be good for the town to see the bank supporting local businesses," Frederick continued, seemingly oblivious to her hesitation. "Especially those run by progressive individuals such as yourself." From the corner of her eye, Isabelle saw Isaac's jaw tighten almost imperceptibly as he busied himself with organizing a display of tools. "While I appreciate the sentiment behind your father's business strategy," Isabelle replied carefully, "I generally attend town functions on my own behalf." Frederick's smile dimmed slightly. "Perhaps I've been unclear. This wouldn't be merely a business arrangement. I've long admired your determination, Miss Montgomery." The pause before determination spoke volumes. Isabelle was well aware that many in town viewed her independence as a character flaw rather than a virtue. "I'll consider your invitation," she said diplomatically, unwilling to create tension with the banker's son, "though I do have inventory scheduled for next weekend. Surely your assistant could handle that." Frederick's gaze slid dismissively toward Isaac. "That's what you pay him for, is it not?" Something in his tone, the barely disguised condescension, irritated Isabelle more than the presumptuous invitation. Before she could respond, Isaac spoke up. "Miss Montgomery's inventory system requires her personal attention," he said, his voice neutral but firm. "It's quite innovative, actually." Frederick's eyebrows rose at Isaac's interjection. "I wasn't aware shop assistants offered opinions on their employers' schedules." "Mr. Miller was simply stating a fact," Isabelle cut in smoothly, "and he's correct. I do need to oversee the inventory personally." "I see." Frederick's expression suggested he saw more than Isabelle intended to reveal. "Well, the invitation stands. The dance begins at 8. He tipped his hat, his smile now decidedly cooler. "Good day, Miss Montgomery." After he left, silence filled the store except for the increasing patter of rain against the windows. Finally, Isaac spoke. "Sorry if I overstepped." Isabelle shook her head. "You didn't." Frederick Foster has always believed his family name entitles him to whatever he sets his sights on. She sighed. "Though antagonizing the son of my mortgage holder probably isn't the wisest business strategy. You don't strike me as someone who makes decisions based on others' expectations," Isaac observed, returning to the tool display. "Is that a compliment or a criticism?" Isabelle asked, genuinely curious. A rare, genuine smile crossed Isaac's face. "Definitely a compliment." The warmth in his expression caused an unexpected flutter in Isabelle's chest, which she promptly attempted to ignore. "Well, in any case, I do need to conduct inventory next weekend, so my excuse was honest at least. You could still attend the dance," Isaac suggested, "just not on Foster's arm." Isabelle laughed. "The only thing worse than attending with Frederick would be attending alone at my age. This town already has enough to gossip about regarding the spinster shopkeeper." "You can't be more than 25, Isaac said, sounding genuinely puzzled. 24, she corrected. But in Williston, any unmarried woman over 20 is considered well on her way to spinsterhood, especially one with her own business and no apparent interest in changing her situation. That's ridiculous. That's small-town thinking, Isabelle countered. Though I admit it does get tiresome sometimes. The storm intensified outside, rain now coming down in sheets. A flash of lightning illuminated the street, followed by a rumble of thunder that rattled the windows. Isabelle jumped slightly at the sound. "Not fond of storms?" Isaac asked. "Not the loud ones," she admitted. "My father used to say thunder was just angels moving furniture, but I never found that particularly reassuring." Isaac chuckled. "My mother said it was God going bowling." It was the first time he'd mentioned his family, and Isabelle seized the opening. "Where is your family now?" His expression sobered. "Gone. Mother passed when I was 16, father a few years later." "I'm sorry," Isabelle said softly. "My father died 2 years ago, influenza. Mother's been gone since I was 12. "It's a hard thing, being the last one left," Isaac said, the simple statement acknowledging their shared experience of loss. Another flash of lightning, another crash of thunder, this one directly overhead. The lights flickered, and then the store plunged into semi-darkness as the electricity failed. "Perfect," Isabelle muttered, reaching for the matches to light the oil lamps they kept for just such occasions. Isaac was faster, striking a match and lighting the nearest lamp, then moving efficiently around the store to illuminate the rest. The warm glow of the lamps cast dancing shadows across the walls, creating an unexpectedly intimate atmosphere. "I doubt we'll have many customers in this weather," Isabelle said, watching as the rain turned the street outside into a muddy river. "You might as well take the morning off." "And do what?" Isaac asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "My quarters are just as dark as the store." Isabelle considered for a moment. "Can you play chess?" His eyebrows rose in surprise. "Yes, though it's been a while. My father and I used to play during storms," she explained, already moving toward the stairs that led to her apartment. "I have his old set upstairs. I'll bring it down." When she returned with the beautifully carved wooden chess set, Isaac had cleared a small table near the stove and set 2 chairs on either side. The warmth from the stove and the soft lamplight created a cozy island in the storm-darkened store. As they set up the pieces, Isabelle found herself studying Isaac's hands, strong but dexterous, handling the delicate chess pieces with surprising gentleness. There was a small scar across his right knuckles, and she wondered about its origin but didn't ask. "You play white," Isaac offered, turning the board. "Father always said ladies should move first in chess and last in dancing," Isabelle replied with a small smile, advancing a pawn to begin the game. They played in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the soft click of pieces on the board and the continuing storm outside. Isaac was a thoughtful player, taking his time with each move, his eyes intent on the board. "You're quite good," Isabelle commented after he captured her bishop with a move she hadn't anticipated. "I had a good teacher," he replied, leaning back in his chair. "A man named Santiago on a ranch in Texas. He'd play anyone brave enough to try, usually for their day's wages." Did you ever win against him? A small smile touched Isaac's lips. Once. The day before I left the ranch, I think he let me win as a parting gift, but he never admitted it. Where did you go after that? Isabelle asked, moving her knight to threaten his queen. Isaac's eyes remained on the board, but his expression grew distant. North to Kansas, then east for a while, eventually west again. His fingers hovered over a pawn before moving his queen to safety instead. Never stayed anywhere very long. Until now, Isabelle observed, immediately regretting the implied question when she saw the flicker of guardedness return to his features. Until now, he agreed simply, offering no further explanation. They continued playing, the game growing more competitive as it progressed. Isabelle was surprised to find herself genuinely challenged. Her father had been an excellent player, but Isaac's strategy was different, less predictable. Check, she announced finally, her queen threatening his king. Isaac studied the board intently, then moved his remaining rook to block the attack. Not checkmate yet. But soon, she replied confidently, already planning her next move. The bell above the door jingled, startling them both. Sheriff Daniels stood in the doorway, dripping water onto the newly repaired floor. Miss Montgomery, he nodded, his gaze moving between her and Isaac, taking in the chess game with narrowed eyes. Miller. Sheriff, Isabelle greeted, suddenly conscious of how intimate the scene must appear, the two of them alone in the lamp-lit store, playing chess like old friends. What brings you out in this deluge? Making rounds, checking for storm damage, Daniels replied, removing his hat and shaking water from it. The creek's rising fast, might flood the lower streets by afternoon if this keeps up. That would put Jenkins' place and the widow Parker's cottage at risk, Isabelle said with concern. Already evacuating them, the sheriff confirmed. Mayor's opened the town hall for anyone who needs shelter. His gaze shifted to Isaac. Could use some strong backs to help move furniture to higher ground if you're not too busy with your game. The implication in his tone was clear, and Isabelle felt a flash of irritation. Before she could respond, Isaac was already standing. Happy to help, Sheriff, he said, reaching for his coat. Isaac, you don't have to, Isabelle began. It's what neighbors do, he cut her off gently. I'll be back when I can. Don't wait up if it gets late. The simple declaration, both his use of the word neighbors and his concern that she not wait up, struck Isabelle more powerfully than she would have expected. She nodded, understanding that this wasn't just about helping with the flood. It was about Isaac establishing himself as part of the community, not just her employee. Be careful, she said. And tell Mrs. Parker she's welcome to stay here if the town hall is too crowded. The same for anyone else who needs shelter. Isaac nodded, something like approval warming his eyes. I'll let them know. After the men left, Isabelle stood looking at the abandoned chess game, pieces frozen in mid-battle. Outside, the rain continued to fall, and she wondered, not for the first time, what mysteries lay in Isaac Miller's past. But more pressingly, she wondered why she cared so much about uncovering them. Isaac didn't return until well after dark. Isabelle, who had kept the store open in case flood refugees sought shelter, was about to close up when the door opened, admitting a thoroughly drenched Isaac. His clothes were plastered to his body, mud caked his boots, and he looked exhausted. Good Lord, Isabelle exclaimed, immediately moving to help him with his sodden coat. You're soaked through. Creek broke its banks, Isaac explained, his voice raspy with fatigue. We managed to get everyone to higher ground, but it was close. Anyone hurt? He shook his head. Just property damage. The Parkers' place took on water, but we saved most of their belongings. Jenkins wasn't so lucky. Poor Mr. Jenkins, Isabelle murmured, thinking of the elderly shopkeeper who'd always been kind to her. Where is everyone now? Town hall mostly. Some went to relatives. Isaac ran a hand through his wet hair, sending droplets flying. Sheriff said to thank you for your offer, but they have things under control for now. Isabelle nodded, then frowned as she noticed Isaac shivering slightly. You need to get out of those wet clothes before you catch your death. I'll heat some water for a bath. You don't need to, I'm not having you fall ill from helping others, she interrupted firmly. Go change into something dry, and I'll have hot water ready in 10 minutes. Too exhausted to argue, Isaac nodded and headed toward his quarters in the back. Isabelle busied herself heating water on the store's stove, filling the large copper tub they kept for such purposes. By the time Isaac returned in dry clothes, a simple shirt and trousers that had seen better days, she had a respectable bath prepared and a pot of coffee brewing. "I'll give you privacy," she said, moving toward the stairs to her apartment. "There's soap on the chair and I've laid out clean towels." "Isabelle," Isaac called softly, stopping her. "Thank you." The simple sincerity in his voice made her pause. "You do the same for me." Their eyes met across the lamplight, and something unspoken passed between them. Then, Isabelle turned and climbed the stairs, her heart beating a rhythm that had nothing to do with physical exertion. In the following days, as Williston recovered from the flood, Isabelle noticed a subtle shift in the town's attitude toward Isaac. Having worked alongside the sheriff and other prominent citizens during the crisis, he was no longer viewed with quite the same suspicion. People nodded to him on the street, and conversations no longer halted when he entered the general store. Even Florence Fletcher, the town's most dedicated gossip, seemed to have revised her opinion after hearing how Isaac had carried her niece's prized piano to safety just before the waters reached her home. "He's surprisingly strong for such a lean man," Florence remarked one afternoon as Isabelle measured out fabric for her. "And quite respectful, too. Called me madam the whole time, even when he was knee-deep in muddy water." Isabelle hid a smile. "Mr. Miller has many qualities people might not expect." "Indeed." Florence's eyes took on a speculative gleam. "You know, my Josephine is of marriageable age now." "Perhaps Mr. Miller might." "Mr. Miller seems quite content with his current situation," Isabelle interrupted, more sharply than she intended. She softened her tone. "And I believe Josephine has her sights set on the new schoolteacher, does she not?" Florence sighed dramatically. "That Williams boy has no prospects to speak of, just books and ideas." "Some might consider those valuable assets," Isabelle countered, carefully wrapping Florence's purchase. "Will there be anything else today?" Recognizing the dismissal, Florence gathered her parcels. "No, that will do. But do remember the Ladies' Aid Society meeting tomorrow. We're discussing the Founders' Day preparations." After Florence left, Isabelle found herself considering the upcoming Founders' Day celebrations with mixed feelings. The annual event commemorated Williston's establishment and featured a parade, various competitions, and culminated in the dance Frederick Foster had invited her to attend. In previous years, she'd participated minimally, setting up a booth to sell goods and attending the dance only briefly, usually leaving early when it became clear no one was likely to ask the spinster shopkeeper to dance. But this year felt different somehow, though she couldn't quite articulate why, or perhaps she could but wasn't ready to admit it to herself. The bell above the door chimed, interrupting her thoughts. Isaac entered, carrying a crate of supplies from the railway station. "Last of the delayed shipments finally arrived," he announced, setting the crate down. "Station master says the tracks west of here are still being repaired, so next week's delivery might be late as well." "At least it's here," Isabelle said, moving to help unpack the crate. "Was there any mail?" Isaac nodded, pulling several envelopes from his pocket. Bill from the Chicago supplier, advertisement for some new patent medicine, and— He hesitated before handing her the last envelope, a letter from Harold Foster. Isabelle frowned, taking the heavy cream-colored envelope. Harold Foster rarely corresponded directly. Their business was usually conducted in person during her monthly visits to the bank to make her mortgage payment. She broke the seal and scanned the contents, her frown deepening. "Problem?" Isaac asked, continuing to unpack the crate but clearly attentive to her reaction. "Mr. Foster is requesting a meeting tomorrow to discuss my business situation," she replied, the quotation marks audible in her tone. "Apparently there are matters of mutual concern to address." "That sounds ominous," Isaac commented. "It sounds like Harold Foster," Isabelle corrected, folding the letter with more force than necessary. "Vague but threatening, it's his preferred approach. Do you think it's about his son's invitation? Perhaps Frederick didn't take your rejection well." "I didn't actually reject him," Isabelle pointed out. "I said I would consider it." Isaac paused in his unpacking. "Will you consider it, I mean?" There was something in his voice, a careful neutrality that hadn't been there before, that made Isabelle look up. Isaac's expression revealed nothing as he focused on removing items from the crate, but there was a tension in his shoulders that hadn't been present moments ago. "I hadn't planned to," she admitted, "but if my business situation depends on it." "You would accept an unwanted suitor to save your store?" Isaac asked, his tone still neutral but his eyes finally meeting hers. Isabelle sighed. "I don't know, this store was my father's life's work. It's all I have left of him and all I have to support myself." She gestured around the mercantile. "I'm not just being stubborn about keeping it. Without this place, I have no means of support, no future." "You underestimate yourself," Isaac said quietly. "A woman with your intelligence and determination would find a way, store or no store." The unexpected vote of confidence caught Isabelle off guard. "That's kind of you to say." "It's not kindness, it's observation," Isaac replied, then hesitated before adding, "But for what it's worth, I think Harold Foster would be a fool to threaten your business. This store serves the entire community. Endangering it would make him unpopular with his own customers." It was a practical assessment, and Isabelle appreciated that Isaac hadn't offered empty reassurances. "You may be right. Perhaps I'm overreacting to his typically dramatic phrasing." "When is your meeting?" "Tomorrow at 2, Isabelle replied, already mentally reviewing her ledgers and accounts, making sure everything was in perfect order. "I can mind the store," Isaac offered. "Take as much time as you need." Isabelle nodded her thanks, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety forming in her stomach. Harold Foster had never been her advocate, even when her father was alive. With Frederick's interest now in the equation, she couldn't help but worry about what tomorrow's meeting might bring. The bank's interior was cool and dim compared to the bright May sunshine outside. Isabelle adjusted her eyes to the change as she approached the teller's window, her ledger tucked securely under her arm. "Miss Montgomery," the young teller greeted her, "Mr. Foster is expecting you." "You can go right in." Harold Foster's office occupied the back corner of the building, offering views of both Main Street and the side alley where the bank's vault entrance was located, strategic positioning that allowed him to observe much of Williston's business without leaving his desk. "Miss Montgomery," Foster rose as she entered, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "Prompt as always. Please sit down." Harold Foster was a study in controlled precision, from his meticulously trimmed mustache to his immaculate three-piece suit. Even in the heat of summer, he never appeared without a waistcoat and watch chain. Today, he regarded Isabelle with the same expression he might use when examining a potentially risky investment. "Your letter indicated there were matters to discuss," Isabelle said, getting straight to the point. "I've brought my ledgers in case there are questions about my accounts." "Always the businesswoman," Foster remarked, seating himself. "But our discussion today extends beyond mere figures, Miss Montgomery." Isabelle kept her expression neutral, though her stomach tightened with apprehension. "I'm not sure I understand." Foster steepled his fingers. "I've been reviewing your mortgage terms. Your father negotiated quite favorable conditions when he expanded the store 5 years ago." "Yes," Isabelle agreed cautiously. "The 15-year term was generous." "Perhaps too generous in retrospect," Foster mused. "The bank's board has been reconsidering some of our longer-term commitments in light of recent economic fluctuations." "My payments have never been late," Isabelle pointed out, "not once in the 2 years since my father's passing." "Indeed, your reliability is not in question." Foster leaned back in his chair. "However, the wisdom of continuing such an extended arrangement with a single woman in business might be." There it was, the prejudice she'd been fighting since taking over the store, now explicitly stated by the man who held her financial future in his hands. "Mr. Foster," Isabelle said carefully, "my gender has no bearing on my business acumen or my ability to fulfill my financial obligations." "In an ideal world, perhaps that would be true," Foster conceded with a condescending smile. "But we live in Williston, Miss Montgomery, not an ideal world. A business requires stability, continuity. Should you marry, as most women, your age naturally aspire to do, your husband would assume control of your affairs. The bank needs assurance that any such transition would not disrupt our arrangement." The implication was clear. Her single status was now being used as justification to reconsider her mortgage terms. Isabelle fought to keep her composure. "Are you suggesting that you intend to alter our agreement based on my marital status?" Foster spread his hands in a gesture of false regret. "The board is merely considering all factors. However," his expression shifted to one of calculated benevolence, "I have proposed a potential solution." "Which is?" Isabelle asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "A business partnership of sorts. Someone with standing in the community who could provide the stability the board seeks." Foster's smile didn't reach his eyes. "My son Frederick has expressed interest in both you and your enterprise. An alliance between our families would resolve the board's concerns immediately." Isabelle sat very still, absorbing the implicit threat beneath his words. Her worst fears were confirmed. Her mortgage and therefore her livelihood was being leveraged to push her into marriage with Frederick Foster. "I see," she said finally, her voice remarkably steady despite her inner turmoil. "And if I decline this solution, then regrettably the board might insist on renegotiating your terms, perhaps a shorter time frame or a significant increase in your monthly payments to offset the perceived risk." Foster's expression was bland. Business is business, after all. "Yes," Isabelle agreed, rising from her chair. "Business is business, and I believe our business here is concluded for today, Mr. Foster." Foster's eyebrows rose at her abrupt movement. "You'll consider my proposal, of course." "I'll consider all my options," Isabelle replied diplomatically, though internally she was seething. "Good day." The bright sunshine outside the bank seemed to mock her darkened mood as Isabelle made her way back to the mercantile. Her mind raced, calculating figures and considering alternatives. Could she pay off the mortgage early, not with her current savings, borrow from someone else? Unlikely in a town where Harold Foster controlled most of the available capital, sell the store. The thought made her physically ill. Her father had built the business from nothing, expanding it from a small general store to the largest mercantile between Casper and the territorial border. It was his legacy and her only source of independence. The store came into view, and through the front window, Isabelle could see Isaac assisting Mrs. Henderson with her purchases, his manner attentive and patient with the elderly woman. The sight steadied her somewhat. At least she had a reliable assistant now, someone who could help her increase business while she figured out a solution. The bell jangled as she entered, and Isaac looked up, his expression immediately shifting as he read her mood. "Mrs. Henderson, I believe that's everything on your list," he said smoothly, completing the transaction. After the elderly woman departed, Isabelle sank onto the stool behind the counter, the weight of Foster's ultimatum pressing down on her. "That bad?" Isaac asked quietly. Isabelle laughed humorlessly. "Worse. Harold Foster has essentially offered me a choice between marrying his son or losing my store." Isaac's expression darkened. "He can't do that. Actually, he can. The bank holds my mortgage, and apparently the board, meaning Foster himself, has concerns about a single woman maintaining such a substantial loan." She rubbed her temples, where a headache was forming. "If I don't agree to an alliance with Frederick, they'll renegotiate my terms to something impossible to meet." "That's extortion," Isaac said flatly. "That's business in Williston," Isabelle corrected bitterly. "At least according to Harold Foster." Isaac was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What will you do?" "I don't know yet," she admitted. "I need time to think, to explore options. And Frederick, will you consider his proposal?" Isabelle looked up, meeting Isaac's gaze directly. "I have no desire to marry a man who sees me as a business acquisition, no matter how desperate my situation becomes." Something flashed in Isaac's eyes, relief, approval, before he nodded. "Then we'll find another way." "We?" Isabelle questioned, caught by his use of the plural. "You gave me a chance when the rest of this town was ready to run me out," Isaac said simply. "I don't forget that kind of debt." "It wasn't charity," Isabelle protested. "You've more than earned your keep." "Even so," Isaac insisted, "you have my help whatever you decide." The simple declaration eased some of the tightness in Isabelle's chest. She wasn't alone in this fight, at least. "Thank you." Isaac nodded, then said practically, "How much time do we have?" Foster didn't give a specific deadline, but I imagine he'll expect an answer before Founders Day. That gives us about 10 days. Then we have 10 days to find a solution, Isaac said with a determination that almost made Isabelle believe it was possible, almost. The next week passed in a blur of activity as Isabelle threw herself into work, partly to distract herself from Foster's ultimatum and partly in a desperate attempt to generate additional income. She extended the store's hours, offered special promotions, and even ventured into new product lines that might appeal to the wealthier residents of Williston. Isaac matched her pace without complaint, opening early and closing late, handling deliveries and customer service with an efficiency that allowed Isabelle to focus on the financial aspects of the business. They rarely spoke of Foster's threat directly, but it hung between them like a storm cloud on the horizon. On Saturday evening, as they were closing up after a particularly busy day, Isaac broke their unspoken agreement not to discuss the situation. "Have you considered selling the store?" he asked, sweeping the floor while Isabelle counted the day's receipts. She looked up sharply. "To whom? The only person in town with enough money to buy it outright is Harold Foster himself, and I'll die before I give him that satisfaction. Not to someone in Williston," Isaac clarified. "There are merchants in Casper or even Denver who might be interested in expanding. Your location on the rail line makes it valuable." "I've thought of that," Isabelle admitted. "But even if I found a buyer, Foster would ensure the new owner faced the same mortgage issues. He wants the store under his family's control, one way or another." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "What about a different kind of partner, someone besides Frederick who could invest enough to pay off Foster's mortgage?" "I've approached several possibilities already," Isabelle said, frustration evident in her voice. "The Hendersons have some savings, but not nearly enough. Judge Wilson might have had the means, but he's too close to Foster to cross him." "What about someone not from Williston?" Isaac suggested. "Someone who isn't under Foster's influence." Isabelle shook her head. "I've written to my father's old business associates in Denver and Cheyenne, but I doubt I'll receive responses in time. Besides, why would someone invest in a small-town mercantile run by a woman they've never met?" Isaac was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "There might be another option." Something in his tone made Isabelle look up from her ledger. "What kind of option?" "I've been saving my wages," he said, "and I had some money set aside before I came here. It's not enough to pay off the mortgage entirely, but it might be enough to make a significant payment and demonstrate financial stability to any bank board that's actually concerned about business rather than forcing marriages." Isabelle stared at him, stunned by the unexpected offer. "Isaac, I couldn't possibly accept your savings." "It would be an investment, not charity," he countered, using her own words from weeks earlier. "I could become a junior partner in the business." "A junior partner," Isabelle repeated, the idea both appealing and alarming for reasons she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "It makes practical sense," Isaac continued. "I already know the business, the customers trust me, and together we might generate enough income to pay off Foster more quickly than either of us could alone." It was a rational proposal, one that could potentially solve her immediate problem. Yet Isabelle hesitated. "Why would you do this? You've only been in Williston for a few months. You have no ties here, no reason to invest your hard-earned savings in someone else's business." Isaac met her gaze steadily. "Maybe I'm tired of drifting. Maybe I've found a place worth staying." The simple statement hung in the air between them, laden with meanings neither was ready to articulate fully. Isabelle looked away first, overwhelmed by the implications of his offer and her own conflicted response to it. "I need time to think about it," she said finally. Isaac nodded, respecting her need for space. "Of course, the offer stands whenever you decide." Later that night, alone in her apartment above the store, Isabelle paced restlessly, considering Isaac's proposal from every angle. Practically speaking, it made sense. His contribution would demonstrate financial stability to any legitimate banking concern, and his presence had already improved the store's operations considerably. But there were complications beyond the practical. Accepting Isaac as a business partner would tie her future to his a man she'd known for less than 3 months, whose past remained largely a mystery. The town's gossips would have a field day, undoubtedly suggesting improprieties of all kinds, and then there were her own confused feelings. Isabelle had long since resigned herself to spinsterhood, focusing on her business rather than romantic entanglements. Yet something about Isaac Miller had breached those carefully constructed defenses. His quiet competence, his unexpected kindness, the rare smile that transformed his solemn features all had affected her more deeply than she cared to admit. Was she considering his offer because it made business sense, or because it would keep him in Williston, keep him in her life? And if the latter, was that a sufficient basis for such an important decision? Morning brought no clarity, but it did bring a summons from Reverend Phillips, delivered by his young son just as Isabelle was opening the store. "Father requests your presence at the parsonage after Sunday services," the boy recited dutifully. "He says it's a matter of community concern." Isabelle thanked the child, her heart sinking. Community concern almost certainly meant that Harold Foster had enlisted the Reverend in his campaign to pressure her into accepting Frederick's suit. The bank and the church were the two most powerful institutions in Williston, and Foster sat on the board of both. When she shared the summons with Isaac, his expression darkened. "Foster's escalating his tactics." "It appears so," Isabelle agreed wearily. "Reverend Phillips has always been reasonable, but he's deeply concerned with propriety and community standards. Foster will have presented my situation as a moral issue rather than a financial one." "Will you go?" Isabelle nodded. "I have to. Refusing would only make things worse." She hesitated, then added, "My offer still stands to accompany me to church, I mean. It might help your standing in the community." Isaac had consistently declined her previous invitations to attend Sunday services, citing his need to catch up on rest or handle tasks around the store. This time, however, he nodded slowly. "I think I will," he said. "It seems I have a stake in community perceptions now." The simple statement acknowledging his potential investment in both the store and Williston itself sent an unexpected warmth through Isabelle. "Thank you," she said softly. The next morning, Isabelle found herself unusually nervous as she prepared for church, taking extra care with her appearance. She chose her best dress, a deep blue that her father had always said matched her eyes, and spent more time than usual arranging her hair. It was vanity, she knew, and probably foolish given the serious matters weighing on her mind. But something in her wanted to present her strongest self today, both to Reverend Phillips and to Isaac. When she descended the stairs to the store, she found Isaac waiting, dressed in what appeared to be new clothes, or at least, clothes she hadn't seen before. The black trousers and crisp white shirt transformed him from store assistant to respectable businessman, and he'd clearly taken pains with his appearance, his usually tousled dark hair neatly combed and his face freshly shaved. "You look," he began, then seemed to reconsider his words. "Very appropriate for church." Isabelle felt a blush rise to her cheeks at his obvious admiration, hastily disguised though it was. "As do you. I don't believe I've seen that shirt before." "Ordered it from the catalog last month," Isaac admitted. Seemed time to have something besides work clothes. The implication that he'd been planning to stay in Williston at least long enough to justify new clothes wasn't lost on Isabelle. "It suits you," she said simply. They walked to church together, aware of the curious glances from townspeople along the way. Williston's white clapboard church sat on a small hill overlooking the town, its steeple visible from nearly every street. By the time they reached it, most of the congregation had already arrived and was filing inside for the service. Florence Fletcher spotted them immediately, her eyebrows rising nearly to her hairline at the sight of Isabelle and Isaac approaching together in their Sunday best. She immediately turned to whisper to her neighbor, setting off a chain reaction of glances and murmurs that rippled through the churchyard. "Quite the sensation we're causing," Isaac muttered as they neared the church steps. "Williston thrives on new gossip," Isabelle replied under her breath. "This should keep them entertained for at least a week." As they entered the church, Isabelle was acutely aware of every gaze that followed them, Most were merely curious, some disapproving, and a few, like Mrs. Henderson's, openly approving. She led the way to her usual pew, about halfway down the central aisle, and Isaac followed, his presence beside her both comforting and unsettling. Just before the service began, Frederick Foster entered with his parents, all three immaculately dressed and radiating the confidence of the town's leading family. Harold Foster's eyes narrowed slightly when he spotted Isaac sitting beside Isabelle, but his expression quickly smoothed into a practiced smile as he guided his wife to their place in the front pew. Reverend Philip's sermon that day focused, perhaps not coincidentally, on the parable of the talents, the biblical lesson about using one's gifts wisely rather than burying them out of fear. While ostensibly addressing the entire congregation, his gaze seemed to linger on Isabelle more than once, as he emphasized the importance of making prudent choices with the resources God had entrusted to his children. When the service concluded, Isabelle and Isaac remained seated as the congregation filed out, waiting for the crowd to thin before making their way to the parsonage for her meeting with the Reverend. "That was about as subtle as a stampede," Isaac commented quietly, referring to the sermon. "Reverend Phillips has never been known for his subtlety," Isabelle agreed, watching as the last parishioners exited, "but he's generally fair-minded at least. You don't have to face him alone," Isaac said, his voice low. "I could accompany you." The offer tempted Isabelle more than she cared to admit. Having Isaac beside her would provide moral support and possibly even strengthen her position, a demonstration that she had allies besides the Fosters. But it might also confirm whatever suspicions Reverend Phillips harbored about their relationship, potentially complicating matters further. Before she could decide, Florence Fletcher approached their pew, her Sunday bonnet adorned with enough silk flowers to stock a millinery shop. "Miss Montgomery," Florence greeted, her eyes flickering to Isaac with barely disguised curiosity. "How lovely to see you both at services today. Mr. Miller, I don't believe I've had the pleasure of seeing you in church before." "Mrs. Fletcher," Isaac acknowledged with a polite nod. "Miss Montgomery has been encouraging me to attend for some time. I finally took her good advice." Florence's eyes gleamed with the acquisition of fresh gossip. "Indeed, how commendable of her, and will you be joining us regularly now?" "That's my hope," Isaac replied smoothly. "Assuming my work responsibilities permit." "Of course, your work," Florence's emphasis on the word made it sound vaguely improper. "I understand you've become quite indispensable to Miss Montgomery's operations." Isabelle intervened before the conversation could deteriorate further. "Mr. Miller has indeed proven an excellent assistant and has helped increase our business considerably. Williston is fortunate he decided to stay with us." "Quite fortunate," Florence agreed with a knowing smile. "Well, I mustn't keep you. I believe Reverend Phillips is expecting you at the parsonage." With a final appraising glance between them, she moved away to join her waiting husband. "That woman could start rumors in an empty room," Isabelle muttered. "She's already decided I'm more than your employee," Isaac observed, rising from the pew. "The entire town will know by supper time." "Let them talk," Isabelle said with more confidence than she felt. "I have more important concerns at the moment." They made their way out of the now empty church and across the small yard to the parsonage, a modest but well-maintained house adjacent to the church building. Reverend Phillips was waiting on the porch, having changed from his clerical robes into more casual attire. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted, then nodded to Isaac. "Mr. Miller, I confess I was expecting Miss Montgomery alone. Mr. Miller kindly offered to accompany me," Isabelle explained. "As the matter concerns my business and he is my employee, his presence seemed appropriate." The Reverend's expression suggested he disagreed, but was too polite to say so directly. "Perhaps Mr. Miller would be more comfortable waiting in the parlor while we speak privately in my study." It was phrased as a suggestion, but delivered as an instruction. Isabelle glanced at Isaac, who gave her a barely perceptible nod, indicating he would respect the Reverend's wishes. "That would be fine," she conceded. Reverend Phillips led them inside, directing Isaac to the parlor before ushering Isabelle into his small study. The room was lined with bookshelves and dominated by a large desk covered in papers and theological texts. He gestured for her to take the chair opposite his desk while he settled into the worn leather chair behind it. "Miss Montgomery," he began without preamble, "I've asked you here today because I'm concerned about your situation." "My situation, Reverend?" Isabelle kept her tone neutral. "Yes." He steepled his fingers, unconsciously mimicking Harold Foster's characteristic gesture. "It has come to my attention that you face certain challenges regarding your business arrangements with the bank." "I wasn't aware that my financial matters were the concern of the church," Isabelle replied carefully. Reverend Phillips sighed. "When those matters affect the spiritual and moral welfare of a member of my congregation, they become my concern. Harold Foster has shared his worries about your future security, and I must say I share them." "Mr. Foster is concerned about his mortgage, not my welfare," Isabelle corrected. "Perhaps," the Reverend conceded, "but his concern aligns with a greater truth. A woman alone in business faces unnecessary hardships. God intended for women to have the protection and guidance of a husband." Isabelle bit back her first sharp response. "Alienating Reverend Phillips would only strengthen Foster's position in the community. My father raised me to be self-sufficient, Reverend. He taught me every aspect of the business so that I could continue his legacy." "Your father was a good man who died unexpectedly," Phillips said gently. "I doubt he intended for you to face these struggles alone indefinitely. The offer from young Mr. Foster presents a solution that would honor both your father's legacy and God's design for his daughters. By forcing me to marry a man I do not love." Isabelle couldn't keep the edge from her voice now. "Is that truly God's design, Reverend?" The clergyman looked uncomfortable. "Love often grows from respect and shared purpose, Miss Montgomery. Frederick Foster is a respectable young man from a good family. Such a match would secure your future and maintain the store your father built." "It would secure the Fosters' control of another Williston business," Isabelle corrected, "and I would become merely the means to that end." Reverend Phillips frowned, clearly not pleased with her characterization. "You do the young man a disservice. His father assures me Frederick holds you in the highest regard." "His father is manipulating the situation to advance his family's interests," Isabelle said bluntly. "And with all due respect, Reverend, I believe he's manipulating you as well." The Reverend's eyebrows rose at her forthright accusation. "That's a serious charge, Miss Montgomery. These are serious circumstances that affect my entire future," she countered. "I came to your meeting out of respect for your position, but I will not be pressured into marriage as a business transaction, regardless of who applies that pressure." A long silence followed her declaration. Reverend Phillips studied her with a mixture of concern and something that might have been reluctant admiration. "You have your father's spirit," he said finally. "He too was stubborn when he believed he was right." "He called it principled," Isabelle replied, a small smile touching her lips despite the tension. The Reverend nodded. "Indeed he did." He sighed deeply. "Miss Montgomery, while I cannot condone your rejection of what appears to be a providential solution to your difficulties, I also cannot in good conscience pressure you toward marriage against your heart's guidance. That would violate the sanctity of the institution itself." Relief washed through Isabelle at this unexpected concession. "Thank you, Reverend. However," he continued, his expression serious, "I must caution you regarding your association with Mr. Miller." "My association," Isabelle repeated, though she knew precisely what he meant. "A single woman employing a single man, particularly one with no established history in our community, invites speculation that could damage your reputation. This morning's joint appearance has already set tongues wagging." "Mr. Miller is a valued employee who has proven his worth to my business," Isabelle said firmly. "The town's speculation says more about their idle minds than about either of us." "Perhaps," the Reverend conceded, "but perception often matters more than reality in small communities. If you truly wish to maintain your independence, you would be wise to consider how your actions appear to others." The warning was clear. Her association with Isaac was providing additional ammunition to those who questioned her judgment and sought to undermine her position in Williston. "I appreciate your concern, Reverend," Isabelle said, rising from her chair to indicate the meeting was concluded from her perspective. "And I will consider your advice carefully." Reverend Phillips stood as well, recognizing that he had made his point and further discussion would be fruitless. "That is all I ask. Know that regardless of your decisions, you remain in my prayers, Miss Montgomery." "Thank you," she replied, genuinely grateful for at least that much. "Good day, Reverend." When she emerged from the study, she found Isaac standing by the parlor window, gazing out at the churchyard where a few lingering parishioners still chatted in small groups. He turned at her entrance, his expression questioning. "Ready to go?" he asked simply. Isabelle nodded, not wanting to discuss the meeting until they were safely away from the parsonage. They thanked Reverend Phillips for his time and walked in silence until they had descended the hill and turned onto the main street, heading back toward the mercantile. "That bad?" Isaac asked finally. "Not as bad as it could have been," Isabelle admitted. "He won't actively support Foster's pressure tactics, but he made it clear that my association with you is causing talk that undermines my position." Isaac's jaw tightened. "So I'm a liability to you now." "According to Williston's gossips, yes," Isabelle said, "but I've never based my decisions on their approval and I don't intend to start now." They continued walking, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The Sunday quiet of the town enveloped them, most residents either still at church or home preparing the midday meal. As they approached the mercantile, Isabelle made a sudden decision. "I've been thinking about your offer," she said, "to become a partner in the business." Isaac glanced at her, surprise evident in his expression. "And I'd like to accept," Isabelle said firmly, "not just because of Foster's ultimatum, but because it makes good business sense. You've proven your value to the store and your investment would help secure our future." Isaac stopped walking, turning to face her directly. "Are you certain? Once we do this, it will confirm every rumor Florence Fletcher has been spreading. The entire town will assume there's more between us than a business arrangement." "Let them assume what they will," Isabelle replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I know the truth of my own mind and heart." But did she? Even as she spoke the words, Isabelle wasn't entirely sure what truth her heart held regarding Isaac Miller. Only that the prospect of him leaving Williston affected her far more deeply than it should if he were merely an employee. "If you're sure," Isaac said, studying her face as if searching for any sign of doubt. "I am," she confirmed. "We can draw up the papers tomorrow." Isaac nodded, a smile slowly spreading across his features, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and transformed his usually solemn countenance. "Then it seems we're to be partners, Miss Montgomery." "It seems we are, Mr. Miller," she replied, returning his smile despite the butterflies that suddenly took flight in her stomach. Neither of them noticed Harold Foster watching from across the street, his expression darkening as he observed their exchange.